brothers, sisters, friends, enemies, and neutrals. Regretfully, there are a lot of people who can be referred to by that term enemy, not just to a person or necessarily a group, but just to people in general. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the recent shooting because there will be enough of that on television. But that man fired 70 rounds with that semi-automatic rifle. Then he left the rifle on the roof and joined the people in appearing to escape. That was a horrendous thing. But in Akron, Ohio, the police cameras, their video does not justify them in what they did. They want to say that surveillance cameras on a building showed a gun flash from his car. Then what the foolish police did was to show a gun and a loaded clip in his car. In other words, there were no bullets in his gun. If he had fired it, the clip wouldn't be full. So as usual, the police have lied. They're trained to lie. They're trained to tell a lie, then stick to it no matter what. This man was shot 60 times by 8 white cops. Suppose that had happened to a white person. Any person, and it's wrong. They don't even in wartime shoot up an individual in that manner. These cops could not say that all of them were threatened. They told the tale after their video showed the man getting out of his car that he ran. Well, that's clearing the way for him to be treated like somebody who is in flight. Then they said he turned around and looked at them. That put them in such terror that 8 cops began firing. One told the lie and said he reached for his belt. Well, the gun was in the car. Why would he reach for his belt? Their lies have fallen apart based on their own information. But in this racist country, we as Black people are never going to have the rights, not just under the Constitution, but the basic rights of a human being. Some of us, we might get a political office and decide that the most important thing to do is stay there. So issues will arise that we ought to address as Black people. And we as Black people, having come through what we did, all those generations we were enslaved in this country, should make us understand the plight of anybody who is oppressed. But our politicians are silent. I was probably the most hated man in this state, in the history of this state. And that was not because there was scandal associated with my name. I didn't chase women or men, didn't bother little boys or girls, never stole anything, never assaulted anybody, never threatened anybody. So why would I be hated so? Because I stood up for the things that I believed. And one of the primary beliefs I have is that nobody who is weak should be bullied by somebody who is strong, or one being set upon by a mob. And because I spoke out, it made me hated. Were I white, I would have been a hero. But there's a certain place white people still want Black people to occupy. In their mind is still that old cliche, he is a good colored boy, she's a good colored gal. When we get some political clout, when we're in a position where our voice will be amplified by the media, we have an obligation to speak. I'm not going to call any names. You know how we say in the community, call no name, share no blame. But there should be a calling to account by the people in this community, all those who hold a political office. The sprinkling of a few dollars here and there should not be enough to put a gag on our mouth and blinders on our eyes. The mayor is talking about doing a lot of work in what they call the core of the city, running from Council Bluffs way on out into West Omaha, everything to accommodate white people. The Jean Leahy Mall was rehabbed to accommodate white people. If there was concern about this city, the entire city, one of the first things they would be thinking about and then planning to do is to remove that so-called North Freeway. It took far more land than a similar road anywhere in this state. Huge amounts of land on both sides of it, both sides. It does not accommodate the amount of traffic that some regular streets in Omaha accommodate. That thing should be taken up. That land should be made use of. And as one city planner from New York had pointed out, if they wanted a passageway through in that area, they could do it with a boulevard. It would take far less land. People could cross it, and it would be a part of the community in the sense of not providing a barrier or a separation or a dividing line. When I wore a younger man's clothes and they were building the freeway, I held them up for over a year. Yes, and I have the documentation to prove it. I wrote to federal officials, and when Mike Boyle, who has died, was mayor, he had said my distribution of the letters and the reports and the complaints that I filed, my distribution would rival that of the World Herald. I contacted federal officials. I talked to them. I was invited to conferences, and it's because they knew that I would tell the truth. They knew I wouldn't just talk off the top of my head. Information was out there, and I accumulated as much as I could. And whoever I was talking to made me no difference about their title. To me, a man ain't nothing but a man. A woman is only a woman, and a hero ain't nothing but a sandwich. So to me, a person is a person is a person. I'm not going to spend the whole program in that vein. There are some very serious things taking place that threaten this country, and white people are so busy trying to deprive Black people of our rights, oppressing the LGBTQ plus community, that they're watching their country go down the drain. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Ukraine is a lost cause. The Russians will continue killing people as long as Ukrainians are willing to die. There is no way Ukraine can stand against Russia. Russia is gobbling up territory. Russia is attacking civilian areas. But a funny thing, when white people, their police officers, sheriffs, private citizens, the best people were slaughtering Black people, lynching Black people, raping Black women and children. It was ho-hum for white Americans. In the Sudan, there is starvation. Men are selling their daughters to be brides for those who have money in order to procure food for the remainder of the family. If that kind of impoverishment, starvation, and privation were happening to white people, you would hear all kind of pleas to the world at large to do something. You see what they're giving and pouring into Ukraine from this country, $4 billion so far. That's being sucked out of the economy. Russia is taking control of more and more Ukrainian territory. How much money, and I've asked this question before, are these white Americans going to be willing to pour into that country to rebuild it, should it remain independent, but war ravaged? Will they be spending the money to reconstruct all those buildings, to replace roads, bridges, rail communication, to provide jobs and employment when there are people going hungry in this country? America is a hellish place. White people like to talk about the exceptionalism of America. America is exceptionally wicked and vicious. When you pick up the daily paper, you are not surprised if you see that there's been another mass shooting. A shooting qualifies as mass if at least 4 people are killed. And some people say only 4. Well, that's in America. And you expect more from American killers than only 4 in order to qualify as a mass murderer. Anybody can get these guns. These are weapons of war. You would not go to Russia. You would not go to China. You would not go to the Netherlands. You wouldn't go to Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Holland. And then going back to the more familiar parts of Europe, Germany, England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and find war weapons, battlefield weapons in the hands of people as young as 18 years old. And white people want to talk about this place as being the greatest country in the world. It is one of the worst. Things happen here that happen nowhere else in the world. So that expression, only in America, often is literally true when it comes to bad things. But now I'm going to turn a corner. When Trump was running for office, I am one of those who thought he had no chance whatsoever of being elected president. It's not unusual for a lunatic to run for an office, but I didn't think there'd be enough loonies in this country to put one in office. And once there, he showed that he was a man who was demented. Now, I'm going to go through some things that I brought here to read. Some of them I've touched on. This one goes to 2017, and the headline, Chambers seeks Trump's removal. When I was in the legislature, people knew I was there. They knew about the legislature. I used it as what was called a bully pulpit. I was not limited, and other people in the legislature felt themselves limited. I wanted to use every tool, every weapon, not talking about firearms and knives, at my disposal to try to change the things that needed changing, erase bad laws, amend bad legislation so that it wasn't as harmful to the public should it be passed if I was unable to stop it. If I could stop it, that was what my preference would be. Then it wouldn't come back 2 years later, having been shown to be oppressive and hurtful to people, and I would assume the responsibility, self-imposed. But if other people took the same oath to which I gave an affirmation, it's kind of interesting that it did not bind them to do the kind of things that I felt bound to do. I didn't pray with them every morning in that hypocritical waste of time. I read the Bible several times from cover to cover. And there was a verse that said something to the effect, the fervent prayer of a righteous man availeth much. Now, either there are no fervent prayers or no righteous men or women praying, because those prayers certainly are falling on deaf ears, if there are any ears to hear them. I don't go for the werewolves, witches, tiki gods, or any of the ones that people claim to worship, because I have yet to see people who profess religion doing things that their religion causes them to profess to believe. So they can have it. It doesn't hurt me, but all people are harmed when individuals get in office under false pretenses, then do not deliver on the promises that they made. This headline, Chambers seeks Trump's removal. Senator offers resolution asking for President's swift ouster. This was a long time ago. State Senator Ernie Chambers of Omaha says he'll introduce a resolution, which I did, seeking President Donald Trump's expulsion from office. A draft of the resolution calls on, quote, appropriate officials to invoke the 25th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution to determine whether Trump's actions and conduct make him unfit for office, in which case the vice president should serve in his place. Now, recently, and by recently I mean when Trump was kicked out of office, he was behaving in a way that was so deranged that some of the people around him were considering what I suggested in 2017, that they ought to invoke the 25th Amendment, which allows appropriate authorities to make a determination that the person in the office of president is unfit physically or mentally to carry out the duties of that office and would be set aside and the vice president would take over. Now, it took years and a lot of craziness for some people to reach that point. But Trump, based on testimony before this January 6th congressional committee, was behaving like a deranged man. And some of the things in this article from 2017 might touch on that. Trump, the resolution states, has behaved in a dangerously problematic and erratic manner, such that the safety and welfare of the United States and its residents are being placed at ongoing grave risk. Chambers, a registered nonpartisan who once jokingly supported Trump's run for the Republican presidential nomination, has been a constant critic of the president's policies and actions in office. Nobody puts a gag on me. I will speak again. All he is a man. And because they hang a title on him, I'm supposed to bow to him, bite my tongue, and not call him out for what he does? Let me continue. Oh, and by the way, why would I declare myself Trump's ambassador without papers when he was running for the Republican nomination? He was so crazy. I wanted him to be set up by the Republicans to run, and I thought Hillary Clinton. would waltz, rumba, samba, tap dance, or otherwise, even break dance her way right into the White House. But there were some simple-minded white women who became offended that Hillary didn't know how to stay in her place, or they didn't like Hillary's husband, and they voted for Trump, to their sorrow afterward. White people are so simple-minded, they will vote against their own interests for some trifling reason. To make at home examples of things that I say when I can, I will digress. When these white people hated me so much, and Black people had confidence in me to such an extent that I would be elected and re-elected as I was, these white people decided the only way they could get rid of me was to change election laws. Don't let America be in practice the country they say that it is, that the people are entitled to representation of their choice. If the choice of Black people does not please white people, then they changed the election laws. They altered, these white people enshrined me, the Black man they hated, in their Constitution, and through me, crippled their legislature forever, punished the kind of white people they would like to keep in office because their hatred of me was greater than their love for their Constitution, their country, and the white people they would put in office. So, with the help of national organizations who knew of me and thought I shouldn't be in office, a Black man in a flyover state like Nebraska caused so much consternation among white people in other states who would never come here that they contributed money to have an item put on the ballot in Nebraska to be voted on so that that pesky Black man can be taken out of office. Even Lee Terry Sr. condemned white people for it because he had a son in Congress and he didn't want him to be term limited out. Nebraska people cannot term limit a federal official. They're governed by federal law, which ignorant white people didn't know. So they, and when I say they, these white people, even including at the national level, changed the Nebraska Constitution, and there was joy throughout the state because I could only serve 2 terms back to back, then I was out. But a proviso was in the Constitution that a person who was term limited out had to sit out at least 1 term. Well, I was by their terms up in age when I was term limited the first time, and they certainly didn't expect me to come back. But when I came back, if I was roaring like a lion before I left, my roar had become amplified when I returned. And I took over the legislature. Articles were written about it, not just in Nebraska. The New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, various national newspapers commented on. And it didn't go to my head because that's not what I was interested in. I was interested in doing my job. I did not accept money from anybody, not as gifts, not as campaign contributions. Nothing was I looking for from anybody. And I told people when they voted, in a sense, they gave me a vote, but all they were doing was empowering me to do something for everybody to the extent that one man can. And I'm going in this direction so that I can challenge white people to point out anybody who has behaved in office as I have. Even their editorials have to acknowledge it. The history books acknowledge it. I was the only person in office who, when little white children came from other parts of the state, they would lean over the balcony and say, "There's that guy who's in our history book." Yeah, history book that young white children study in school throughout this state. Oh, you didn't know that? Well, there's so much you don't know that it just fits right into that closet of unknown things. I told people, if you lose me, you're going to lose a good thing. Well, they're finding out now. Somebody should rise up, and I don't mean in a violent way, and take the reins of government that are placed in our hands and show what one person can do. And I demonstrated it for over 4 decades. And by the way, I was in the legislature 46 years, and the other 4 years I was in public office serving on the learning community. So for 50 years, I was in elective office and never made very much money, but money was not what I sought. But continuing, Chambers said his resolution against Trump wasn't inspired by the whirlwind of recent news surrounding Trump's controversial disclosure of classified information to Russian officials. You all forgot that, didn't you? That as president, Trump disclosed classified information to Russian officials. Oh, that's right. You all don't read history, so you don't know anything. You're so busy being against Black people and history about the vicious things white people did to us in this country that you don't pay attention to what's happening around you. I do. I'm going to read that again. Chambers said his resolution was not inspired by the whirlwind of recent news surrounding Trump's controversial disclosure of classified information to Russian officials and his firing of FBI Director James Comey. Instead, Chambers said Trump's foreign policy decisions, particularly those regarding North Korea and the Middle East, have the potential to do great harm to Americans. He torpedoed the Iran nuclear treaty. So Iran started enriching uranium, and they're at the point almost where they can produce a significant weapon, thanks to Trump. Who paid attention to it other than me? Probably nobody. Oh, and Kim Jong-un started testing more weapons, and now they have a hypersonic weapon, meaning it flies faster than sound. It can reach the United States, thanks to Trump. And he talked about a love affair between him and Kim Jong-un. Kim said, by the way, in Asia, the last name is first. Kim is not his first name. Kim is the family name. His father was Kim, his grandfather was Kim. He is Kim, his sister's Kim, because that's their last name. Kim Jong-un was smarter than Trump. And now they have those missiles and they're continuing to test them. They even tested one while your president, Biden, was over there schmoozing with the people in South Korea. Just to remind you Americans, the president has behaved like a quote, deranged, demented, drunken idiot. That's what I said and mean it. But I should apologize to all those who are deranged, who are demented, and who are drunken idiots. But he underestimated Kim Jong-un, insulting the North Korean leader and stirring him to test more missiles, Chambers said. He called him Rocket Man, didn't realize that that's what Kim Jong-un was working on, rockets, which you all call missiles, nuclear missiles. Kim Jong-un is not crazy. He is not a fool, and he is a much faster learner than Donald Trump. So in 2017, I wanted to get rid of Trump. So what happened? Trump made a telephone call and there were things he said during that call that were used and will be used, in my opinion, to perhaps bring charges of a criminal nature against him. Here's an article that appeared in January of 2021, and I read it, and it became a basis for me to file an action against, well, I won't go into all that, but it led me, among other things, to write a letter to the U.S. Attorney in Nebraska, but I'll read the article first. On tape, Trump asks official to find votes. President presses Georgia Secretary of State on election. This article was written by Jeff, Amy, Darlene Superville, and Kate Brombach of the Associated Press, Atlanta. President Donald Trump, and it's dated January 4th, 2021, from the Lincoln Journal-Star. President Donald Trump pressured Georgia's Republican Secretary of State to, quote, find, unquote, enough votes to overturn Joe Biden's win in the state's presidential election, repeatedly citing disproven claims of fraud and raising the prospect of criminal offenses if officials did not change the vote count, according to a recording of the conversation. Change the vote count, your white Christian president said. You lovers of Donald Trump, you fools. The phone call with Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger on Saturday was the latest step in an unprecedented effort by a sitting president to pressure a state official to reverse the outcome of a free and fair election. On the call, this call was made and the people on it confirmed that it was made. So some of it I'm going to skip. Trump's renewed intervention and persistent and unfounded claims of fraud come nearly 2 weeks before he leaves office and 2 days before twin runoff elections in Georgia that will determine political control of the US Senate. Trump got involved, his candidates lost, and the Democrats took over the Senate. Well, it's split 50-50, but they took over enough seats to split it 50-50, and in a tie vote, the vice president of the party in power votes in the Senate and is, in fact, the president of the Senate. But continuing, the president used the hour-long conversation to tick through a list of claims about the election in Georgia, including that hundreds of thousands of ballots had been lost. He denied that he had lost. He talked about mysterious things occurring that did not occur at all. And what I'm going to do, because much of that call was talked about, rather than take time reading it, what he wanted this man to do was find 11,800 votes because he lost Georgia by 11,779 votes. One more would have given him the vote. There were 3 recounts in Georgia, one of them by hand, which was required by law, one because Trump demanded a recount. So after that call was made and the article was written about it, when I get information, I act on it. I could not bring a charge against Donald Trump. I could offer a resolution when I was in the legislature. That carried no legal weight, but it gave me a chance to raise some issues publicly. But I did write a letter to the then U.S. Attorney in Nebraska. This is the letter, a brief one. The Honorable James Kelly, Joseph Kelly, U.S. Attorney for District of Nebraska. He had been a county attorney in Lancaster County, a Republican he was, before he was named to U.S. Attorney in Nebraska. The party in power names the U.S. attorneys throughout the country. While county attorney, he was aware that some police officers who were being investigated and fired as a result of internal affairs investigations had resigned and gotten a job with the Sheriff's Department of Lancaster County and the Nebraska State Patrol. I objected to both of those, wrote a protest to the then county attorney, mentioned that he ought to look into it, action should be taken. Naturally, he did nothing, but I kept up the pressure and said that I was going to ask if I had to do it by petition, I would try, but I was going to write a request to the presiding officer of the Lancaster District Court and ask that person to convene a grand jury to investigate what was happening in law enforcement in Lancaster County. Well, to head that off, Kelly then had a special prosecutor. He wasn't called a special prosecutor, but had an attorney investigate these cases. And naturally, he came back and said, well, it's okay to let them go and be hired by these agencies. And I'd written a very long treatise on that. But this is the man who wound up as U.S. attorney. And I'm not naive enough to think that he would do anything, but it gave me a chance to bring this issue before the public. And there was some news coverage of it. It was dated January 4th, 2021. Subornation of perjury by President Donald Trump. Dear Mr. Kelly, this will be a brief letter written in accord with my stringent, self-imposed dictate that I follow my conscience as informed by my oath of office, as well as my personal principles, to take action whenever a public official violates the law or violates the oath of office he or she took. According to the 9th edition of Black's Law Dictionary, suborn is defined in this way: to induce a person to commit an unlawful, wrongful act, especially in a secret or underhanded manner. 2, to induce a person to commit perjury. 3, to obtain perjured testimony from another. And these are the things Donald Trump was trying to get the Secretary of State in Georgia to do, to lie about the outcome of the election, give perjured testimony, that all of these things Trump wanted the Secretary of State to do. He wanted that person to testify to, even under oath if necessary, that indeed there was fraud in the election in Georgia, and that Trump in fact won, even though Trump was recorded telling the Secretary of State to find him these votes. Subornation of perjury, the crime of persuading another to commit perjury. Continuing with the letter, this information is not presented to you by way of instruction, but rather to give the basis for my letter. Also enclosed is a copy of a marked by me article from today's Lincoln Journal-Star, which serves as a public record, excuse me, a public record of what has been placed into the public domain. I'm suggesting that you explore whether you may have an ethical obligation pursuant to your duty as a government lawyer to seek appropriate action by the U.S. Department of Justice to deal with this, as I view it, subornation of criminal acts by an elected official of a state. We both know that, quote, no person is above the law, unquote, and that the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that this and no other president is immune from application of criminal sanctions in the event that he commits a crime. I'm faxing this to you and will hand deliver a copy to Nebraska Attorney General Doug Peterson for his consideration of official involvement in view of his having officially involved his office in other legal action before the U.S. Supreme Court, even on behalf of partisans of the president. After all, objectivity would demand action by him. In this instance, he had put Nebraska on record as joining a lawsuit filed by the Attorney General of Texas against the election officials in Pennsylvania, challenging the way they enforce their laws related to elections. And because this Texas Attorney General knew enough about what would happen at a lower court level, the case would be thrown out. There's no way that the Attorney General of Texas can file a lawsuit against officials in Pennsylvania to compel them to enforce their laws the way this guy in Texas wants. So to get the maximum publicity, he filed it directly in the US Supreme Court. That did make a splash, but the Supreme Court, without even a hearing, kicked it out. And there had been similar types of things attempted by these white elected officials. Yet these exceptional white Americans, these superior white men who are running this country into the ground, who are having books taken out of public libraries, doing what they can to keep certain matters of a historical nature from being taught, even in the universities, like Jim Pillen, who is the Republicans' nominee for governor of this state. Those are the things that they're doing, this craziness, and the courts kicked out dozens of these kind of lawsuits. But because the Secretary of State backed the Nebraska Attorney General and signing on as a friend of the court, I filed ethics complaints against them at the state level because I don't sit back and let things happen without taking action. Even if the result is not what I want, I have an obligation to do what is available for me to do, and the outcome is in the hands of others. But that which is within my power to do is what I always did. And people knew that I would do it. And when they got involved in certain things, they knew they would hear footsteps behind them, and they knew whose footsteps they would be. And like a passage from a poem about this unseen horror, this terrible fiend that was so frightening, the person dared not turn around and look for fear of what he would see in the dead of night. That's the way I was to these white men. I was the one they feared. I was the one they threatened, and I was the one they could not put in fear. So they changed their constitution. Naturally, this guy, Kelly, didn't do anything. But when he resigned from office because his party was kicked out, Jim Pillen, who is the Democrats' choice for governor, and because there's so many Republicans, whoever wins the Democratic primary is going to be the governor. This Jim Kelly was hired by Pillen to work for him. And I'm sure that there's a chance that this guy will be given a high position in Pillen's administration, advising him on the law. He cannot appoint this guy attorney general because the attorney generalship is an elective office in Nebraska. But I wrote that letter to him to make a record of it. Nothing was done at the state level, but things were done other places. Now, let me get these papers together and sort it out so that I won't go over the same thing more than once. But while I look at them, I'll just continue ad-libbing. A political office can be like a megaphone. It will amplify your voice. Here is an article that is interesting. Remember, I just read, and I say remember because you shouldn't have forgotten already, about Trump pressuring that Secretary of State? This article is dated January 21st of this year. Prosecutor wants to subpoena witnesses in probe of 2020 election. The Georgia prosecutor looking into possible attempts to interfere in the 2020 general election by former President Donald Trump and others has asked for a special grand jury to aid the investigation. The U.S. attorney wouldn't respond to me, but looky here. Fulton County District Attorney Fannie Willis on Thursday sent a letter to Fulton County Superior Court Chief Judge Christopher Brasher asking him to impanel a special grand jury. She wrote in the letter that her office has received information the election in Georgia, quote, was subject to possible criminal disruptions. Willis has declined to speak about the specifics of her investigation, but in an interview with the Associated Press earlier this month, she confirmed its scope included a January 2nd, 2021 phone call between Trump and Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. And I was on that as soon as it was publicized. Willis has tried to interview witnesses and gather evidence, but some witnesses, including Raffensperger, have refused to cooperate without a subpoena. And that's the letter she put in her, what she put in her letter to the judge. Raffensperger did not immediately respond to a request for comment, but Raffensperger said Thursday afternoon on Fox News that his office has cooperated, sending Willis's team anything they've requested, and that he would follow the law and comply if compelled to appear before a grand jury. Special grand juries, which are not used often in Georgia, can help in the investigation of complex matters. They do not have the power to return an indictment, but can make recommendations to prosecutors on criminal prosecutions. Willis said the special grand jury is needed because it can serve a term longer than a normal grand jury term. It also would be able to focus on this investigation alone, allowing it to focus on the complex facts, some people say complex, facts and circumstances. And having a special grand jury would mean that the regular seated grand jury would not have to deal with this investigation in addition to their regular duties, Willis wrote to the judge. Willis, who took office in January 2021, sent letters to top elected officials in Georgia in February, instructing them to preserve any records related to the general election, including evidence of attempts to influence election officials, hitting Trump right on his big empty head. Willis has repeatedly said she is aware of the intense public interest in her investigation, but she said she won't be rushed. She told the Associated Press a decision on whether to seek charges would come in the first half of this year. But remember, as the prosecutor, she could bring charges, even though the grand jury couldn't hand up an indictment. If it developed the evidence, she could bring the charge. Now, I wrote her a letter. The Honorable Fannie Willis, Fulton County District Attorney, regarding special grand jury investigation into actions of former President Donald Trump. Dear District Attorney Willis, being neither a sideline sitter nor Johnny-come-lately to suggesting that actions such as yours be undertaken against Trump, see copy of enclosed letter to the U.S. Attorney in Nebraska, dated January 4th, 2021, raising the issue of subornation of perjury by his stratagem, by a strong arm approach to the Georgia election officials. I'm writing to applaud and express respect for your principled action. Not intending to be melodramatic, I say that you are a forceful gale dissipating the suffocating toxic smog of partisan political perfidy, a laser beam of light piercing the darkness of disingenuous disinformation disseminated by a clack of deceitful dissemblers in the service of the corrupt / dissembler in chief, who is Donald Trump. Following railroad lingo, you're not a local, but rather a fast express, and I believe you'll deliver the mail. Soon to be 85 years old, July 10th, and having served 46 grueling years in the Nebraska legislature, the longest sentence in the history of Nebraska, I've been around the block a few times and have seen a thing or two. My operative credo was to perform my duties without fear or favor, and my primary constituency comprised the least, the last, and the lost. You are performing an essential service to this country and the rule of law by just demonstrating that no person is above the law and that scofflaws, regardless of status, will be held accountable for misdeeds. Continue as you have started. Believe in yourself and trust your judgment. The inner compass will not put your feet on a false path. Be relentless in pursuit of justice. Never give in, give up, or quit. Stay the just course that you have charted. Events will vindicate you. Old souls are permitted to give advice. In this case, counsel, counsel, to counsel, counsel, meaning the prosecutor. Do you get my drift? By the way, there's no need to throw away good stationery when on its face full disclosure is made and it served the purpose of identification. I'd written the letter on my senatorial letterhead. Enclosed to be perused at leisure is a potpourri of items documenting the manner in which I have behaved down through the years. Respectfully, Ernie Chambers, and I sent her enclosures. And this letter that I sent was sent after the announcement that she was going to have that grand jury. So let me go to the next article. This is dated June 22nd of this year. At hearing, witnesses detail Trump coercion, and it goes into the House committee investigating that January 6th insurrection. And it talks about the pressure that Trump tried to put on various election officials throughout the country. And at one gripping moment, two Georgia election workers, a mother and daughter, testified that they lived in fear of saying their names aloud after Trump wrongly accused them of voter fraud. Quote, that Trump is good at attacking women and the weak, just like a lot of white men are, when they're armed and another person is not, when they're in a mob going after one person, when, like Johnny Depp, a man attacking a woman, but one-on-one, toe-to-toe, nose-to-nose, no, they always bring a mob. Continuing. There were a lot of threats wishing death upon me, said the daughter, and her mother also served as an election official. The public hearing, the fourth by the panel this month, stemmed from a year-long investigation into Trump's unprecedented attempt to remain in power and so forth. But this lady had pointed out that the president is the one who should serve and protect the people, not attack a private citizen trying to discharge civic duty by accusing her of being a scammer, a destroyer of ballots, a distributor of narcotics, and all these other things. And Giuliani put that stuff out in the open. They should be sued, but there are other things that should happen to them, which I won't say. Then, now that was in June of this year, and I want to find an article here, and I don't want to take a lot of time going into other things. I bring so much material that and I can't go through it, but here's the article. This article is dated July the 6th, just a couple of days ago. Georgia subpoenas Trump allies. DA alleges coordinated plan to influence election results. And by the way, she can subpoena Trump. The Georgia prosecutor investigating the conduct of former President Donald Trump and his allies after the 2020 election is subpoenaing U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham, former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani, and other members of Trump's campaign legal team to testify before a special grand jury. And they've got a subpoena, they will come. Fulton County District Attorney Fannie Willis on Tuesday filed petitions with the judge overseeing the special grand jury as part of her investigation into what she alleges was a, quote, multi-state coordinated plan by the Trump campaign to influence the results of the November 2020 election in Georgia and elsewhere, unquote. The move marks a major escalation in a case that could pose a serious legal challenge to the former president as he weighs another White House run. While the special grand jury has already heard from top state officials, Tuesday's filings directly target several of Trump's closest allies and advisors. Quote, it means the investigation is obviously becoming more intense because those are trusted advisors. Those are inner circle people, said Robert James, former district attorney in DeKalb County, which neighbors Fulton. The special grand jury has been investigating whether Trump and others illegally tried to meddle in the 2020 presidential election in Georgia as he desperately tried to cling to power after Democrat Joe Biden's victory. Trump continues to insist that the election was stolen, despite the fact that numerous federal and local officials and even Trump's own attorney general have all said there is no evidence of the fraud he alleges. They said when Trump was in his dining room watching television and saw his then attorney general Barr say that there was no fraud, he took his food and threw it against the wall. Trump, the president of the United States, the head white man, the superior white Anglo-Saxon, the exceptional one, and ketchup, mustard, and mashed potatoes were running down the wall. Your president, he was president at that time, deranged, insane, and people around him and his staff were considering invoking the 25th Amendment, as I had suggested years before, to remove him from office due to his being incapable of discharging the duties. Anyway, the investigation is separate from the congressional committee that has been examining the events surrounding the deadly insurrection at the U.S. Capitol on January 6th, as well as the Department of Justice's own probe. Now, the U.S. Department of Justice can bring criminal charges. And so far, the committee has not turned their information over to the Justice Department because they want to finish, make their report, and then anything that they have can go to the Justice Department, but they don't want their investigation to be impeded or interfered with while it's progressing. You see how much information I give you all? I'm not even in office anymore. And I'll be 85 years old Sunday. 85 years old, still walking, talking, doing push-ups and squats and curls. Well, anyway, y'all gonna say, uh-huh, and you've gotten demented. Listen to your rambling. But when I ramble, I know where I'm coming from, I know where I am, and I know where I'm going. And my talking is designated by other people, whatever they want to designate it, based on their level of intelligence, understanding, and I might add hatred and hostility and animosity. Finally, Willis, who took the unusual step of requesting a special grand jury earlier this year, has confirmed that she and her team are looking into a January 2021 phone call in which Trump pushed Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger to quote, find unquote, the votes needed for him to win the state, which would have constituted perjury. So he was suborning perjury from the Secretary of State of Georgia. Trump was in violation of the law. Will he be prosecuted? These are white men dealing with white men. Now, Ms. Willis may not be white. I'm just not sure, but I've got reason to believe she may not be. But at any rate, we're going to see what's on the line for that lizard known as Donald Trump. And I apologize to the lizards. They don't behave contrary to their nature and to the way that Donald Trump has behaved contrary to what decent human nature ought to lead a person to do. I don't know if I will spend another day on this earth, so I don't know whether I will spend another day in an elective office. I still have people asking me that question. I'm not a fortune teller. I'm not a soothsayer. I cannot predict the future. And I will see what I will see, as will everybody else. But when the current member of the legislature finishes his terms that he's allowed under the Constitution, I told people that if I'm alive, first of all, if my health is good, if my mind is clear, and most of all, if the people of the 11th district think that there's something of value that I can do in that legislature and want to sentence me to additional time, I would give it consideration. But I would not promise to do anything like that, but I would consider it. And not only would I have served longer than anybody in the legislature, I will have come back twice. And I will be the oldest person to ever win the office, the oldest person to ever serve in the office. So it indicates that age is what you let it be. Now, there are some things that I don't remember like I once did. For example, it was a Wednesday morning, it was foggy, and dew was on the grass, and the temperature was 68 degrees. There was a car that ran up on the sidewalk, and I knew the license plate number then, but I just can't recall it now. So my memory is slipping. But I suppose the things that are worth remembering, I do remember fairly well. So I'm going to say, as I do at the end of every one of these programs, quoting the canary, who was notified that the door to the cage was slightly open, I'm out of here.
Thank you for watching the Ernie Chambers Show. If you'd like to make suggestions, email us at ewcfacts@gmail.com. That's ewcfacts@gmail.com. This has been an EWC Communication production.